Welcome to Writer Therapy, Creating Opportunities in Film, TV, and Beyond. Tonight we have Lee Jessup and Phil Stark as our guests, which is going to be really fun. And let me just do a quick little read of their bios. Lee Jessup is a career coach for screenwriters, specializing in guiding emerging and professional scribes toward long-standing and prolific screenwriting careers in both TV and feature writing. Additionally, she has provided consulting services to NBC International, the Universal Writers Program, the Final Draft Big Break Contest, and Inevitable Foundation, and is an adjunct professor with the David Lynch Graduate School of Cinematic Arts. Her one-on-one coaching clients include everyone from showrunners to studio writers to contest winners, TV writing fellows, as well as writers just starting out. She's the author of the best-selling books Breaking In, Tales from the Screenwriting Trenches, and Getting It Right, and Insider's Guide to a Screenwriting Career. And Phil, now Lee has been here with us before on Symposium, but this is Phil's first Symposium, and we're super excited to have him. He was a guest of Reckless Creatives podcast, which I'll drop a link in the recording email so you can listen to that. But Phil is the screenwriter of Dude, Where's My Car? And now he's a therapist, and he sees clients virtually from all over the state of California. He also writes about mental health and personal growth as experienced through talk therapy. His book, Dude, Where's My Car? Tharsis is available on Amazon. If you tell me what is the catharsis?
Catharsis is literally, the definition is the release of strong or repressed emotions, and it's something that we often work to achieve in therapy, and it's something that just happened to be similar to the title of a movie that I wrote.
So we have the most pressing question so far. What is on that wall behind you, Phil?
This is some rotating art. This is my office. This is how I present to clients in therapy, and I have a wall that has some Velcro on it, and I rotate the art out every now and then I see which clients notice, and I take note of that, and it's a nice little talking point.
So is it like a Rorschach test? Like
well, no, it's funny. Some clients come in and they never notice at all, and some clients, as soon as they log on, like, oh, you got new art. I like it. So it doesn't mean anything particular. It's just interesting.
And we apparently have a therapist in the audience too, which is always fun. So I think for the years that I've known Lee a million, and been in this industry, running Script Magazine, all this other stuff, and now Pipeline, I would say probably the number one thing I see writers struggling with is that mindset of staying in the game. You know, like I joined Twitter in 2009, and there's a bunch of us who were like, oh, gung-ho, yeah, we're going to make it. There's very few of them left. And I think a lot of it is the mindset, like staying in the game. You know, doesn't mean that they weren't talented, but maybe they just couldn't hang on. So I know this is like a big question, tackling the mindset of staying in the game. But with Phil, you were a screenwriter. And I think it's fascinating that you became a therapist. So what kind of advice do you give writer clients of yours about that mindset of how do you do this when it's such a hard industry to break into?
Right. Well, you know, part of my job as a therapist working with screenwriters or with anybody is to ask big, obvious questions that if somebody else asked a client, they might be like, well, it's basic. What are you talking about? But like, if I was working with a client who was struggling with their screenwriting career in a way where they're trying to decide whether they want to keep doing it or not, or whether they're enjoying it or not, or whether it's worth it, or whether it's going to happen for them. I mean, my most basic question is always does it make you happy? You know, if you're dragging yourself to your computer to finish a draft of a project that you've promised yourself you would finish, and it's painful, I mean, that's like an ingredient for writer's block right there. If you wake up in the morning excited and you have an idea for a scene and you get in there and start writing before you even have breakfast, that's a different story. So while I work with screenwriters on sort of the practical aspect of the business, zooming out and asking questions like, is it still a passion for you? Is it still moving you? Especially after having a certain amount of years of doing it, is sort of how I would start to approach things.
Yeah. Lee, with your clients, what do you see them doing that might be helpful? Like maybe some actions that some of them have taken when they thought maybe maybe it's time to give up, but maybe it's not. And, any thoughts on that?
Sure. So I generally find that, and Phil, I don't know if you've seen it the same way, but I find that screenwriting, for those who are able to stick to it, it's not a big love. It's not necessarily inspiration. It's a compulsion. It's a compulsion that you can't help wanting to tell stories this way. It's not necessarily the sanest thing that you will choose in your life. There are easier battles to fight, but it's a need to tell stories in this manner. And so I do think that for any writer, for anybody who's here today, for anybody who's checking out the recording, if ultimately you feel there's something else that you can do and be just as happy, kindly go do it. Years ago, I had a client who was a second careerist, a very young second careerist, who came to see me after retiring from technology at a very young age, very successfully, and saying, "Oh, I think I want to do screenwriting. That sounds great." He took some classes, we had some talks, and he then came in, I think 4 or 5 sessions in, he was like, "Listen, I've been thinking, and I think I can be just as satisfied pursuing the law." And I was like, please go. Like, please, it's hard, but if something else can make you as happy, don't hesitate. I think it's a lot of it for me is preparation and preparing yourself psychologically for what's coming, for understanding that it's going to be challenging and difficult, and it's not always a straight line. And trying to really get in the mindset of, this is a marathon. I need my support system. I need to make sure that I'm training myself for it. And I can tell you that my most successful working clients, their superpower is bouncing back, because they're going to be great successes, and there are going to be some very fun celebratory dinners. But there are also going to be some disappointments, and it's about finding kind of what is your way to bounce back, and also recognizing when there's disappointment, allowing yourself time with that, with the understanding of, is this still the thing that you want to participate in, knowing that it's never going to be handed to you.
Yeah. Have either of you, I just read a book this last week called The Art of Possibility. Have either of you read that? Oh my,
No?
okay, everybody go get it, but get it on audio, because it's written by, I'm not going to get this right. I'm not going to do a whole analysis and discussion about the book, but it's written by a therapist, and her husband is a orchestra conductor. So it's really talking about the mindset. It's great for people who are artists, like this guy is an, musician, artist, whatever, conductor, but he also talks to business owners, speaks to them. He also teaches students. And so he would apply her theories of the mindset and not going down that downward spiral. But instead, whenever something bad happens, you actually celebrate it, like, hooray, now I have possibilities of something else. Like, it's like this whole other mindset that I think for artists is a really interesting thing. But the reason I say to get it in audio is because sometimes they'll play the orchestra music while he's talking. They both narrate it. They're really good narrators. So it's more like you can feel by example. It's really interesting. But that's my little tip. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes.
And if you could put some classical music while I'm talking, that would make what I'm saying much more interesting too.
I think we should try it.
Absolutely.
I can layer it in when I edit the recording.
Right.
For next time, I will send you music cues, and we'll go from there.
So when you were talking about like handling rejection, some advice about that. Bill, you want to start?
Handling rejection?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
like
tough.
when I rejected you and said, I'm not going to play music.
Right. Well, one thing I work with my screenwriting clients with as a therapist is dealing with the inner critic, imposter syndrome. So it's interesting because, when I hear you mentioned a rejection, we're thinking you give somebody a script and they don't like it, which happens all the time. But I think the thing that people can really work on that's actionable, that they can really be in control of, is how they handle their own almost like anticipatory rejection. The inner critic, when you're writing something, you're like, this is never going to be good. Or you give something to somebody to read, and you're like, this is probably not so great. It's just a rough draft. I tend to work as a therapist with clients more about the inner thoughts that they're dealing with, And that's identifying where this inner critic is coming from, whose voice it is, sort of learning to handle it and own it in a way that it makes them able to write the best script that they can. And then I work with clients about feeling that way and not getting too caught up in results-oriented thinking. Although it's hard in this business, you give somebody a script whether they like it or you don't. But if they don't like it, does that mean that the script is bad? It doesn't necessarily mean that. So there's a practical aspect that you're talking about that I can appreciate, which is what do you do when a producer or a manager doesn't like your script and they don't want to represent you and they want to read the next one? And that's a practical thing I'm sure a lead deals with all the time. With my clients in therapy, it tends to be more, man, you're being really negative about this script and they haven't even read it yet. Or, I hear this voice you have sometimes that sounds very negative, and I'm wondering where that is coming from, because it's different from the person I hear telling me that they love screenwriting and they want to be a screenwriter and they love doing it. So I would actually sort of maybe modulate and think about the difference between like the rejection that we get eventually that happens no matter what, and then the rejection we can more control, which is the one that we sort of give ourselves.
I gotta ask Phil, because as you're telling this and you're talking about this, it's also very much like almost like marriage counseling, like for writers who are in their mind married to the industry and married to this dream. Like, how do you, like the rejection is part of that relationship with these producers, not a marriage, but a relationship therapy, like how you.
No, that's true. And I think the thing to remember is that I would have the same work with a client who is a lawyer in Kansas who is just sending a script out to a contest, and a producer who's been Emmy awarded and is getting paid to write a pitch for a feature that they've always wanted to. No matter what level of success you achieve or don't in the business, the rejection you can deal with in terms of yourself and also externally, it always exists.
Yeah,
absolutely, totally agree with that. And I think that ultimately rejection is never just about rejection, right? I mean, there's of course I sent it to somebody and they said no, but it's never quite that simple, right? Because there's always the worst fears that we have about ourselves that those rejections confirm or suggest is possible, right? Are they going to find out that I really can't write? I can't tell you how many times I've had writers turn in work and then, kind of run and hide, not literally, but emotionally speaking, because is this when they find out? Is this the moment that I prove that I am not all the things that I want to be? I find that most writers, and by that I mean all but 4 that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with thousands at this point, have some level of imposter syndrome. Because and I talked to somebody today who was like, I don't deserve to call myself a writer yet. Well, what do you need to have happen to call yourself a professional writer? And there's a lot of fear in that, and a lot of things that we feed into. Writing is a very personal thing. So I think it's about understanding what the rejection is really about, because at the end of the day, if there's one thing I can promise everybody here is you're going to get rejected. We know that is coming. Because of that, you have to build your support system. You have to build your community. You have to have people that you can go to and lament those losses with, because they're going to hurt. And it's okay to be in that hurt and feel that, and then let that go. At the end of the day, it's a cloud in your sky. Your career is the sky. It is not the cloud. The cloud can take over things, but it is just a cloud, and those clouds will pass or dissipate or do whatever it is that they do. So knowing that rejection is coming, you really have to think about, what is my support system to get through those difficult times? What is my kind of inner artist afraid of, right? What am I afraid that those rejections are confirming? How do I look at that and commune with that? And how do I learn to let go of that? Because those rejections are going to come. Some are going to hurt more than others. But the thing is staying the course and understanding that that's just all part of the marathon. You have to hear a certain number of no's to get to that all important yes. You also have to have a system of your own accountability. How do we know the script is working? How do we know the work is landing? The word dream came up earlier, Jeannie, you had mentioned it. And I think that when we look at this pursuit as a dream, that's when we get very hopeful and non-specific. Something has to happen. We don't know what it is. We have to dream it. We have to hope for it. There are very specific steps to becoming a working writer, right? Going from emerging to professional. They're not guaranteed steps, but they're very specific things that you have to do. And it's up to you, the writer, to identify what those are. So it's not this thing that you're not exactly sure how it's going to happen, but you have final draft and you're writing the thing and let's hope. And somebody said that if you throw a great script down in the middle of Sunset Boulevard, somebody will find it. I don't know about that. What are the steps that you are taking to actualize your career and to move things forward so that it's not this amorphous fantasy, but rather something that you're working for a little bit every day, every week, every month until you get there?
Yeah. And so I wanted to touch on some of that mindset stuff first, just to, kind of center everyone in terms of like, how to position that mental space in this art and this career, because it's not an easy one. But I want to dive into some of the people's questions and get to those discussions of opportunities and how to create them and all of that. Someone had posted that they're 51 and they're looking to break into TV. Currently they're going the contest route. And what are maybe some other options for breaking into television?
So television tends to be a little bit more siloed, especially at this time. Right now, breaking into television, this is a momentary thing, right? This is not a lasting thing. This is just where we are in the ebb and flow of the business following the Great Contraction, the end of peak TV, which ran from 2013 to 2023. Getting staffed in TV right now is a challenge. It's a challenge for people who've staffed before. It's going to be a limited time challenge. But what you need to do is find ways for your work to get discovered. For the record, I work with a client who is very proud and very vocal about the fact that he staffed for the first time when he was 52 years old and is now, I think, on his fourth room and just sold a short story, and that he's now getting paid to write into a feature and has been very successful and is the loveliest of humans. So one, if that is the goal, and if you feel that you can ultimately do the work that a room requires, that you have the energy and you have the kind of mental acuity to be sitting and pitching ideas all day, and that all speaks to you, I would not let your age get in the way just yet. Contests are great. TV staffing, the TV writing fellowships are incredibly important. At this point, we have those from the broadcast networks over at ABC, Disney, we have NBC, we have Paramount. Warner Brothers is morphing and shifting and changing, but they do have a program. Fox has been back the last couple of years. There's also other kind of non-network fellowships and labs that have been really important, like Mentorship Matters, the Sundance Lab. So look at all of those. Look at representation. When you discuss representation, or when you meet with potential representatives, talk to them. Are they staffing? Are they not staffing? Are they interested in TV? Because in order to staff, your work is really about doing the work on the writing front and building community. At this point, because of the contraction and because of the reaction to the end of peak TV, we're finding that most writers staff in a room because they know the showrunner, they know the number two in the room, or they have a specific bit of lived experience that really applies to the show, and we're able to rise to the top of the pile for the decision makers. I know somebody who just staffed in a 4-seat room. There are 800 pilots that were submitted for those 4 seats. And that person knew somebody who knew somebody and was able to get their lived experience in front of the showrunner. So a lot of it is community building. If you want to think out of the box, I have a writer who staffed some years ago because he very strategically decided to take a class with a working TV writer that he thought he would connect with. He did indeed. That working TV writer put him in front of a showrunner that then effectively gave him his first staffing opportunity. That writer is now a showrunner. So you do have to think strategically. You do have to think about the opportunities that are out there for your voice, your work, the people for you to connect with, and explore how to go about it beyond the competitions, the fellowships, the labs.
Yeah. Phil, there's another question on here I want to pose to you. Do you have any advice on failure and burnout? I landed my first professional writing job recently and got laid off less than 6 months in. My third layoff since I started working as an assistant in 2021. I used to love screenwriting so much. I got my degree in it, but now every time I open final draft, I have an existential crisis and I keep finding myself avoiding doing the work.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that really speaks to my experience here, which is sort of the psychological side of being a writer. And this is a concept that I like to call a creative crop rotation. And it's the idea that we can get burned out when we're constantly trying to farm the same plot of land, essentially. And so I encourage clients who have that feeling like, oh, I don't want to sit in front of the computer. I try to encourage them to give themselves the freedom to not sit in front of the computer and to instead find something else that they find creatively fulfilling. It could be as simple as exercise, or it could be as different as writing short stories, or drawing, or remodeling, organizing their closet, anything that sort of gives them any kind of satisfaction, maybe on a creative level, but maybe not. Because the concept of actual crop rotation is that certain crops grow well in certain times, and if you farming the same plot of land, it will become barren. But if you rotate crops and do different things, they might not necessarily all be the same ones that you want, but you have 3 different crops and you go 10 to 1, and then you 10 to the other, and then you work on the next one. And then when you come back to the first one, you might find that the field is fertile. And if you step away from the computer and give yourself permission to not write, do other things that inspire you, you might be riding a bike one day and exercising and listen to a podcast, or you might be painting your kitchen and you might have an idea for a scene, or you might have an idea for a cool title or a plot twist, and you might find yourself thinking about it more, and then you might find yourself drawn to your computer and you're writing again. So I would say when you're experiencing that kind of burnout, that kind of writer's block, it's almost like you're like a wind-up toy and you're pointing yourself at the wall and you're just hitting the wall and you're not going anywhere else. So sometimes turning that, letting it go around the other way, even backwards, can eventually get you back into the chair and writing with excitement, which is like why we all got into it in the first place.
And
Agreed.
I feel that toy against the wall thing.
If I can add to that, I think everything Phil said is absolutely right on. Burnout is real. It's not a mind over matter thing. You will burn yourself out, and you need to be aware of that. You need to plan for that. I'm a big believer that creativity begets creativity. If you like to draw, go draw. If you like to sculpt, go sculpt. If you like to, whatever it is that you can do creatively that will take you away from the computer, do it. And more importantly, go do some purposeless fun. Right. I think that for writers, there's a lot of like, everything that I do has to have a purpose and it has to pay off, and it has to feed the bigger picture. Go for a hike, go dancing, go do something that isn't research, that isn't in the name of and for the sake of the project that you're writing on. Go have some fun. There's nothing more motivating than having a good time. Go do a cooking class, go whatever it is. Exist beyond the script. And like Phil said, I think creativity will come back to you. It'll find its way because it's your compulsion and it's not going to just disappear. But it's about getting creative and not limiting yourself or deciding that you know how to work your way or throw hard work against the problem, because when we are at burnout, that is never going to help.
Yeah. And also too, like one of the things I do is I volunteer, probably too much in my town, but I now run a little cemetery up the street that I don't get paid to do. But you end up the cemetery, I meet people, but also my shop, I meet people. But when you meet other people and you engage in the world and you're meeting these other interested people, story ideas will just kind of like percolate, and you don't even really realize it until one day you're like Phil was saying, an idea just kind of pops in your head, and then you start getting passionate about it. This speaks to a lot of what we're already talking about, but I just want to address it. Should writers create their own opportunities if they struggle to find work at the industry? I know a lot of people are creating short films, or raising money for indie films, or maybe doing a narrative podcast, or can you speak about maybe some of those other more unusual ideas that Phil, maybe with some of your clients have had, or Lee, yours, that are like, oh, I think maybe I'll try, like, if the that whole expression, if the door's shut, try a window, like,
Yeah, that makes me think back when I was writing. The currency for TV was a spec of an existing show. You would write a Seinfeld, you would write a Simpsons, and people would read that and be like, okay, this guy knows how to write television. I worked at the time with a guy named Will Forte, who's now on Saturday Night Live, super talented, really funny guy. And back then he was strictly a writer, and everybody had specs. Everybody had a spec Seinfeld, right? Everybody's dime a dozen. He created this really funny cartoon book. It was like The Awkward Adventures of Dealing with Your Father-in-Law. And every page had a very crudely drawn cartoon about a very awkward encounter with a potential father-in-law. It's like he walks in and he's in the bathtub and he's trying to shake hands. It's just really silly, inane, crudely drawn stuff. And it was so funny. And everybody wanted to read it. So I bring that up because the answer is yes. You shouldn't limit yourself to writing scripts. Anything that you can create that will show people your potential, your talent, and show them your voice is worth doing. So back then it was a crudely drawn cartoon. Nowadays it could be a podcast, it could be short stories, personal essays. I mean, little chapters of a memoir kind of thing. And that also falls into the creative crop rotation idea. It's so great to have multiple projects you're working on. So I wouldn't limit yourself to working on a feature or a pilot, especially if you're feeling sort of twinges of burnout. Freeing yourself to make anything that you think is funny or interesting or entertaining, without regard for whether somebody else will feel like that, will eventually, you'll have creating something with it that is your voice and really speaks to who you are as a writer or a creator. And then that is ultimately, I think, what people really respond to from the outside. Not just, wow, what a well-structured pilot, although that counts, but it's like, wow, this voice is funny. What else can I see from them?
Yeah, completely agree. I've had people who write articles for us, a pipeline artist, and even myself, when I wrote for Writer's Digest, I had an agent reach out to me. I wrote an article about Twitter, like how I used Twitter back in like 2011. And they were like, they just like my writing voice. So you never know. It can be something completely unrelated to screenwriting. And, you might still catch somebody's attention. But that creative crop rotation thing, genius.
That is very good. Absolutely.
Lee,
Yes.
how important are screenwriting contests?
It depends. If you don't have a path into the industry, if you don't know people in the industry, it's a great way to get your work out there. And assuming you're able to win or place well in some of the big competitions, it's something to help you present yourself, let people know that, okay, the work is landing somewhere. If you have, the flip side of it is that a few years ago, I got an email from one of my writers and just like absolute panic because a competition that he's been submitting to every year and was like a semifinalist in, he submitted and nothing happened. And I was like, okay, but you are now repped. You are developing a project with an industry company. Like, I understand that that is the barometer that you set for yourself, but you've graduated career-wise to where lovely. But it's not exactly the thing that you have to have happen in order to get to where you are already. So I think that competitions are important and serve a purpose. I don't think they're the end all be all. And I think you have to have realistic expectations, and really understand what is the best case scenario, from finaling or winning a big screenwriting competition. What is the likely scenario? What doesn't always happen? I think there's a lot of misconception out there of like, oh, well, I'll win a big screenwriting competition and I'll sell my script. The two are not married to one another in any way, shape, or form. And I can tell you that as far as winning and selling, very few people have done that in the industry at large with a particular screenplay that did that well in a screenwriting competition. It's not to say that it's impossible, but it's about setting the right expectations and recognizing that competitions are really a tool for exposure. It's about exposing your work. It's about then being able to take that finalist placement, that win, and take that to try and find your own representative or find producers to work with. If they're not coming to you once the winners are announced, but it's also understanding which competitions the industry still relies on, and they're not a lot. There's a handful of them. Script Pipeline very much being one of them. I did Blacklisted, that I just recorded, that is coming out in the beginning of the new year. And I totally just ended up talking about Script Pipeline the whole time because Script Pipeline has been really instrumental for finding these scripts that ended up on the blacklist, being the list, not the website. So there is importance, but you have to understand what is your objective with them, what is possible, what is not possible, and what you are utilizing them for in your career. So it's not across the board like, yes, you have to submit. You really have to understand the career stage. What is your path in, and how do the competitions help you?
And we actually we had some of our staff on doing a screenwriting contest panel giving tips on them. So I'll put a link to that in the recording email too, so you guys can listen to that. And one thing that I always say to people when you're looking for a contest, it's so easy. They should really list who the last year's finalists were, whatever. They should be easy to find, and then reach out to them on social media and say, hey, what did this contest do for you? What was it like working with them? And, no contest should be afraid to have somebody ask questions of their finalists to see, what actually was the end result and if they felt supported. Phil, uh, and one of our attendees asked, physical disability is a factor for some of us, imposter syndrome, off odds, market, lack of energy. Do you have any suggestions about transcending what seems impossible on many levels?
Wow.
That's a big one. We could do
Well,
like
it's
a
very,
whole
it's very,
thing on
it's
that.
very difficult to trans something that's impossible. I mean, that's almost
It
impossible.
seems impossible.
I would say that you have to measure that impossibility with the passion and the joy for what you're doing. If your goal seems so far away and your whole aim is to get to that goal, and you're not enjoying the path along the way to the goal, then I would say that's a problem. And if I was working with a client like that, I would ask them if they could be happy in that world, and if that's something that they would be happy with living with, and if they would enjoy that. It's very easy, especially in this kind of a career, to have your eyes on the prize from a very early age, and then always be working towards that, and not accept the fact that things change in life, people change, and we often need to reassess what we're doing career-wise, whether you've made it or not, whether you have an agent or not, whether you're making money or not, whether you've had somebody say they like your script or not. I think it's always valuable at certain points in life to assess where you are in terms of many things, relationships, work too, and really be honest with yourself about whether I'm still enjoying this. I mean, if you wake up in the morning and you're not looking forward to going to the computer, that to me is the ultimate litmus test. For me personally, I knew if I was thinking about a script while I was in the shower, I was still excited about it and I wanted to write it. As far as beating the impossible task, it's hard to frame it like that, although breaking into the business can often feel like that. But I would say the most important thing, whether you're breaking in or trying to break in or have already broken in, is whether you're still enjoying the process, because ultimately that's what it really is all about.
I have to ask, Phil, when you first started, because you were a professional screenwriter, did the career end up being what you thought it was going to be? Or was the reality of it a little different? And I know it's a little bit different time, but
Sure.
You're very fulfilled and happy as a therapist. But what surprised you the most about when you became a pro?
What really drew me to the business was I started writing features, and I wrote 5 or 6 features after I'd moved out to LA. And then my friend said, you're pretty funny. Well, why don't you write something funny? Why don't you like a TV show like The Simpsons? And I was like, I wrote a Simpsons, I wrote a Seinfeld. Then I got into TV, and then I worked on that South Park, and then that 70s show for the whole run of the show. And I really experienced what it was like to be a writer producer, right? It was the writing was what got me into it, but then it became the slice of the pie got smaller as the producing duty, producing, casting, editing, dealing with the network, running a show. All these things that in terms of television are much bigger of a pie. That's the writer producer version of it. But I still wrote features, and when I sold Dude, it was amazing. And that was more of a straight screenwriting experience, although the voice of that was so specific that it wasn't the kind of script they could just replace the writer on or bring somebody more experienced on or somebody who'd written in the genre before. The voice was pretty much just mine. So I really got to do both versions of it. But ultimately what happened to me was that I started to not enjoy it. And part of that was because I wasn't making as much money as before and the opportunities were limited. But I also found myself just sick of thinking of pilot stories and 3-act structure. What could be a twist for the second? And it took me a while to realize, I'm just not happy doing this. The thing was, though, that's all I knew how to do. So my struggle was to sort of assess honestly whether I was happy doing what I was doing and weigh that against the anxiety and the trauma of change into doing something that at the time I didn't know what it would be, but ended up being this. you know, I've had my toes and dipped my toes in various parts of the screenwriting world in a professional level. And you know, I'm happy with where I am now, but I've really had all the ups and downs you can have in a career. And part of the big part of that is assessing honestly whether you're enjoying it, and then accepting the fact that eventually it might be scary to change, but ultimately that's what spurs you to the next stage in life.
And I also, sometimes you don't even need to leave writing in general. You can take that script and try writing a novel. Like I wrote a practice novel and I fell in love with it. Like not I fell in love with the novel, but fell in love with the process. Like it, you know, so sometimes you just try something different.
Well, I
And
should say too, on that note, Jeannie, I still write. And
yeah.
I've written books. We'll link to some of my books.
Oh yeah.
I write articles, I write guest columns, and I found that actually my voice is now really much more genuine and real than anything I'd written before as a script, because it was really me. There are no characters, there's no plot. So that's to say that I've still found a way to write in a way that satisfies me and gets me excited to sit down at the computer. I'm just not breaking the first 12 episodes of the first season.
That is great. And I love that you're a therapist. I think it's like perfect. So Lee, I want to pose this to you. There's a couple people who asked, one lives in Singapore, another lives in Africa, and wanting to know, is it possible to break into the international market, the US market? This one person from Africa has experience writing for local shows, but wants to break out more internationally. The other one from Singapore just wants to know how to break into the US market. Do you have thoughts about that?
Sure. So I think at this point in time, you know, the pandemic did a lot of not great things, but one of the great things has been making the world smaller and more accessible. And I find that at this point, there are writers that are writing features all over the world. So there's certainly, if you are writing US centric content, you can certainly do it from anywhere. I think it's important to look at the US market, to look at what we're making and ask yourself whether what you are writing fits with that world, fits with that market. You know, I think where we run into challenge sometimes is when you are an international writer, you are not writing in the US, but you're also not writing for the US market. The US market is very specific about what it makes. And, you know, kind of with the death of the distribution deals that used to exist, foreign sales, all of those things, they used to do what they do. Now that there's so many more local markets, what the US market makes has become very, very specific. So it's just kind of understanding your place in that US market, if it is the market that you want to write for. But features, I really do believe you can write from anywhere these days. I have friends who are representatives who represent writers all over the world. If you do want to write TV, then you have to talk about LA and being in LA and getting to LA long before you staff, because there's so much relationship building that's happening, because there's so much that you can count, you can't really account for, you can't really plan for in terms of, I have a writer who staffed because she met a showrunner at a barbecue and they talked horror movies and they're both horror fans and the show was a horror show. And before you know, 2 weeks later, she's staffed. So you never know and you have to allow for that. But features you can absolutely write from anywhere, with the caveat of, even though most general meetings are happening over Zoom right now, there may be a moment where your representative, if and when you have one, says to you like, hey, I think it might be a time for a trip to LA. Let's get you in front of some people. Let's see if we can get some in-persons and put you in front of your fan base. So know that might be coming, but at this point, I have writers writing everywhere.
That's good. Okay, so Phil, this is got a couple people who posed questions about spouses. One has a super supportive spouse. Their problem with rejection is that it means that the possibility of making money keeps getting pushed farther out of reach, and they're supported emotionally and financially by their very patient wife. But there's a lot of guilt that he's feeling, because maybe not feeling like they're successful in the eyes of their spouse. And he said it could be crushing at times. And then the other one has a little very specific, I don't want to read the whole thing because it's very specific to her, but the husband is very successful in the industry, and she's a writer, and he basically never tells people she's a writer. She doesn't feel supported by him at all. He doesn't try to open doors for her. And so we've got the supportive spouse, the not supportive spouse. Thoughts about being married
Yes.
to a writer.
Well, let's take the first one, the supportive
That might be
spouse.
easier.
It sounds like the situation, and this could be a general situation, is the spouse is supportive of the aspiring writer who is working towards becoming a writer, but financially it hasn't happened for them yet. I think that's a great situation that you have a supportive spouse. And if I was working with this couple as a couples therapist, I would sort of ask the spouse a little bit more about that support and clarify that it's genuine and explore for any resentments. I would also examine the idea of like, are we putting off success as a light at the end of the tunnel that then means we could be happy? Because if we're in a situation where we're not happy now, but we're hoping we'll be in the future, oftentimes that's a carrot that we don't always achieve. So I would say that I would really want to assess your relationship now. If we're happy in this relationship, if we're happy with what we're doing for a career, and really sort of zoom out and assess these things. Now, for the client whose partner is successful in the business and does not say that she's a writer, I would be very curious about it as a couples therapist. I would ask that person out, wow, your wife is a writer. Do you find yourself resistant to telling people, and why? And that's what my first instinct would be, is to explore that. I know maybe the writer asking this question is like, okay, what do I do? What do I say? How do I do this? But if I was sitting with this couple, it would be directly to the more successful one in the business and explore that resistance. And on a practical level, there might be things about, fears of preference, or not wanting to entangle romantic relationships with work relationships. But as we often explore in therapy, there's often deeply rooted issues for that in terms of why we're in this relationship, what we feel like relationships are like, the shame or pride of ourselves and our partners. I found like maybe those are a couple of questions, but for me, like there are a couple of like potential cases to explore. And so the answers are not so much with me, but with like the people in those relationships.
Somebody asked, thank you, Joe. I mean, I didn't mean you to call you Joe. I'm looking at the question, Joe, but Joe asked a question about the current state of the feature film industry and what changes you see in the upcoming year. I'm going to put a link in the recording video that Lee had done, one like the post-strike landscape kind of thing a while back. So I'll put that in so you could dive into that a little bit deeper, but just a quick overview, Lee, of what your thoughts are about the feature film side.
I love the feature film side. And I started this industry in the 90s, just to age myself properly. And I remember like 1993 or 1994 opening of Vanity Fair, and finding an article titled "The Death Rattle of Cinema," which I took very personally, because cinema shall not death rattle. I find the industry always goes away in terms of what is cool and exciting and hip, whether it's online content or digital content or streamers or episodic content or peak TV, or the million different things that we have out there. For a minute it looked like Quibi would be the thing, and then there was a pandemic that didn't really help with that. But it always comes back to movies, which makes me beyond happy. I think this summer was a really exciting summer, specifically because Longlegs, which is an independent title, took a summer box office weekend in July. And the fact that that can happen still, that an independent movie can take a summer box office weekend. Summer is always really very carefully scheduled for studios to make the most amount of money possible during that time. And the fact that Longlegs was able to win the box office on a given weekend in a movie that didn't promote the star that was involved in the project, I thought was really exciting. We are seeing the market itself, the feature market, look for very specific genres, which I think we always do. But I think it's that much more so now because TV has contracted the way that it has. And so everybody's trying to nail down what is being searched for, what are buyers looking for, what interest is there. in the feature market. And there we're finding that horror thrillers, erotic thrillers, broad comedy, romantic comedy are kind of leading the pack. I can tell you that while all of this is happening, I have clients whose scripts go out there and usually submitted by representatives who are then sending the material to producers. And I'm really excited to see the volume of producers the material continues to be submitted to, the interest that we're getting. It is a vibrant market. We are recovering from the strike, and I think it's important to remember that. But I think the feature market is really where it's at right now. And I personally love that it always goes back to features. I think that there's a lot of power in features, and that you are, as a writer, are invited to write the beginning, middle, end of a story. All the business is on the page. While movies are very much a director's medium, I do think that for you as a writer, there's much that you get to make as far as the meal possible with a feature. And that is just very exciting. And ultimately, movies are still a bit of the Wild West, and there's still an audience of filmmaker that is reading scripts, that does it for the love of making movies. It is not a sane auction. I do every year, I lead the pitch presentation over at the American Film Market with Cassian Elways, who is a storied producer. And he will always have a moment where he'll stop and say, "You guys, making movies is crazy. You have to be a little crazy to do this." Well, Cassian's produced over 300 movies, so it worked out for him. But I think that it's just a space of people that at the end of the day are a little crazy, love movies. You have to understand the business. It is a business. But before the pandemic, I was talking to friends in representation who were like, TV, 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 because that's where we need to get paid, TV. And post-strike, I'm finding that those same friends in representation are saying, movies, 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 where are screenplays? What's happening on the feature side? And I love that that's what I'm seeing continue to get out there while we recover from this contraction, and writers continue to thrive in that space.
You love features.
I do. Love it.
Okay, so here's a Phil question. I've heard the suggestion from a playwright to write to learn something about yourself. What can you say as advice to a writer like me who writes as a form of self-therapy and self-discovery?
Well, that's interesting. I think it relates to when I was starting out as a writer. I always wanted to break the story. I needed to know what the characters were going to do, what scene was going to happen, this and that and the other. And when people said to me things like, "Oh, I like to just sit and let the characters talk to me and see what the characters want to do," I was like, "Well, that's bullshit. I got to plan this out." Now, as a therapist, like when I watch a show and the character seems to be doing something that's not in character, I can see the note that it's because they needed to get to this scene. And now I find that the things I enjoy the most are ones where everything seems to click because a character is doing something and why, whether you agree with it or not. And that's part, I think, of a writer understanding themselves. The clients that I work with, like, they are the most amazing characters in their own movies. And the things that they do are very natural and sometimes perfect. Like, often a client will say, "Oh, I don't want to do this one thing. Whatever I do in life, I want to make sure I avoid this situation." And I know in the back of my mind, this is perfect. This guy is going to have to confront this exact situation to achieve the closure and get past this and, get to the goals in life that he wants to do. So I think, related to your question, understanding yourself, why you do the things you do, why you do the things that might be in contrast to the things you say make you happy, why you might self-sabotage yourself, why you might be resistant to putting yourself out there and trying to achieve something that you want for fear of maybe not being able to do it or convincing yourself that it's not going to work. I think the more you can understand about yourself, the more compelling characters you can write. And the more compelling characters you can write, the more I think you're going to get good reception from people, as opposed to the kind of scripts where it's more ABC. I needed the character to do this because we needed to do this scene, because that's what you do in these type of features or TV shows.
I used to blog. I don't really do it much anymore. And I would write personal essays as a practice of being vulnerable and putting it all on the page. And I used to say, I rip the wound open and hand the reader the salt shaker. And I think that practice of doing that was very helpful in creating characters and giving them wounds and knowing that it's okay to go there,
Mm-hmm.
Lee, I know you have experience with pitch contests, competitions. Do you do they offer any success possibilities like the pitch contest? There's different kinds of pitch contests. Like if you go to AFF, their pitch contest is very different. It's almost performative.
It's performative. It's not, you
Yeah,
don't
it's
have,
not like what you would do in the room.
yeah. It very much is kind of for entertainment, and for learning, but you don't have a bunch of executives who are sitting there going like, yes, I want to read that script. So AFF is more fun, and in the spirit of fun and performance, which I think anytime you get to talk about your work is a good thing. Get comfortable with it, practice it. There are, let's see, I mean, there's the pitch presentation that I run over at the American Film Market every year. But again, it's performative because may there be producers in the audience who are listening and saying, "Ooh, that sounds interesting." There may, and there have been. So there's definitely a purpose to that, but it's myself and my panelists who are judging that particular pitch presentation. And yes, we do award winners in the end, and there's passes to future events and whatnot that happens there. As far as pitch competitions, we don't have a ton of competitions. We have a lot of events, right? Fade In still puts up the Hollywood Pitch Fest event that happens every summer. Coverfly does Pitch Week a few times a year that you have to submit and qualify for, so you have to get chosen for it. Then we have the online pitches that are available on sites like Roadmap Writers and Stage 32, where you can go and pitch your pay to pitch to managers, producers, executives that are getting paid to listen to pitches. And the ultimate reward, right, is getting your script requested because of the beauty of the internet and all things Zoom that allow us to facilitate different things. A lot of providers out there have utilized it to monetize and to create paths to connect writers and specifically managers, but also up and coming executives, et cetera, to get exposure. It's all in the name of connecting and getting exposure to the work.
And I'm also going to put in a link to another free symposium we did with an agent and a manager. And all that I can say is write a great log line. Just saying. Write a great log line.
Absolutely, especially now. I mean, we talked about competitions earlier, right? If you do really well in competitions, if you do really well with script pipeline, what's going to happen? What's Matt going to do? Matt is going to send a list of log lines of the winning scripts to his circle of trusted friends. They're looking at the log line, they're looking at the concept. And because of that, in early career, it's really important that you think about the concept that is powering your work, because that is what's going to power your log line. And you have to understand that you are being evaluated from concept on. If the concept is interesting, somebody will ask for the script. If the script is brilliantly executed, they will ask to meet with you. But it starts with that log line, starts with that concept.
Social media, how important is that? And any for writers breaking in? I know for me, like if somebody pitches me like for an article or something on the site, and I go look and see who they are, see if I'm following them already, if I know them. Don't be a hot mess is all I have to say on that subject.
Yeah, well, you don't want to be a hot mess. Your job is to write a feature script or a pilot script and make them great and make them stand out there. I remember times where I sat down with writers who would come in to meet with me, would be like, "Oh my God, I had such a productive morning." Like, "What did you do?" "I wrote 3 tweets." Like, no, that's not what we're talking about. If you are naturally savvy with social media and you want to use that to the favor of your career or in the favor of your career, go nuts. Still monitor your time. It's still social media. It can still eat hours of your day. Do I know people who got hired from online conversations? Yeah, I do. Do I know many of them? No, I don't. So I think that you have to prioritize your time and you have to prioritize things that don't make you crazy, and really kind of choose accordingly.
Okay, this one's for you, Phil. It's a long question, so I'm just going to read it. I'm an artist, writer, copywriter, prolific writer of short fiction. Since surviving the 2018 campfire in Paradise with my family, I've written short stories based on this actual event. I've been offered diametrically opposed views during a few rewarding webinars. One, this has already been done. It'll likely be rejected. No doubt referencing a less than stellar first documentary by somebody. And then Ron Howard's truly fine, accurate, I was there, and emotionally satisfying to me effort. And then number two, this sounds like a story you must write. So basically, she's got this experience. Some people have already done things on it, but maybe not necessarily her story and her perspective. So thoughts on it's already been done, that maybe she's got a new view of it, and things like this be done again.
You know, if I was a producer and I was pitched a script about a person who survived the fires in California or any natural disaster, I might be interested, simply because you know, thinking like a producer, global warming is very hot right now, and that might be a thing, right? So I think from putting on my producer's hat, that you got that going for you. If as a producer I found out, oh, and by the way, the script is written by somebody who survived the fire themselves, I'd be more interested in. I think, wow, this is getting more compelling. So, you know, there's the whole adage, write what you know. But I would also expand that by saying you can be your own greatest resource. I mean, you know, a movie about a tragedy or a trauma can be compelling, but also to think about that was written by a person who experienced that tragedy or trauma, I think is even more compelling. So both with my producer hat, my writer's hat, and my therapist hat, I'm compelled by that version of that approach.
This one's for Lee. Do you have any advice for people stuck at the entry level who are having trouble getting into the writer's room, even as an assistant? It seems like the assistant to writer pipeline is dead as a doornail, and there are very few opportunities for emerging writers these days. I'd also be curious, like with Phil, like, you know, since you did work in a TV room.
Well, I can jump in real quickly because I actually have clients who are in that pipeline. And it's a very common pipeline. I mean, the opportunities might be fewer. When I was starting out, you know, there were 30, 40 half-hour comedies on TV, and each one of them had a staff of 10 writers and 3 writers' assistants. Then there was a writer's coordinator, and now it is a pipeline. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get along with screenwriters, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get a script, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you staff, sometimes you don't. But that's a real way to get, especially into the TV side, which is why, as Lee mentioned, it's sort of thing you really need to be in LA for. Even if the room is somewhere else, it starts in LA. So I think that's a real way to approach it. And it's sort of actionable in the sense that you really can hustle and network and get your way into a job as a writer's assistant is a way that you can't necessarily as a writer, although I would encourage you to do the same thing in terms of being a writer. So I think that's a legitimate way to pursue it. And it's very similar because, you know, I don't know how it is now, but I would assume that maybe a part of getting a job like that is certainly your connections, your resume, your skills, but also maybe if they want to know you want to be a writer, so they might look at your material too, and that might be a part of the whole consideration as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think the pipeline, there are less jobs in the room right now. The rooms are smaller. When you have a room with 4 writers, you're not going to have 3 to 4 assistants, a PA, a showrunner's assistant, a writer's assistant, and a coordinator. That's just not going to happen. It's still there. Rooms still have assistants. Assistants have not been kind of discontinued. It's just more limited, much as staffing is. For the record, I have somebody who just staffed on her first season for Grey's Anatomy, who was an assistant prior. And she actually went to her producers and said, I don't want to come back as an assistant. So when they invited her back, she was like, I'm not going to do a year or 2 as an assistant. And they called her 3 days before the room started and we're like, you want to come in as staffy? She came in as staffy. She's, you know, produced a number of episodes by this point. It's really exciting. So I agree with everything Phil said. It is about networking, relationship building, all of that. But it still exists. And, you know, the thing that I love about writing is that at the end of the day, it's a very blue collar job, right? Put your head down, write your way out of the problem. Write a great pilot, write a great feature, connect with people, create fans for your work, and then see where the opportunities lead. But very much, if you want to staff in TV, be in LA. If you're young enough, go be an assistant in a room. Talk to a bunch of people who are already assistants, because one day one of them is going to get promoted and they're going to call their 3 friends and say, I just got my promotion. It's Thursday afternoon. Who's available to start in the room on Monday? Or worse yet, it's Sunday afternoon. Who's available to start tomorrow? I know those stories firsthand of people that got into a room that way. So you have to create every opportunity that you can for yourself, knowing that you don't know which one will be the opportunity.
So speaking of opportunities, somebody asked about the writer's strike, like how it, had ended and how they settled it, and how that might, how the end of the strike, how that might affect those of the writers listening to this who are trying to break into the market. Is it harder now for TV? Focus more on features?
It sounds like with each strike, sort of the amount of production sort of shrinks, although I'm thinking back to the strikes I was involved in back before peak TV. But yeah, I mean, a strike is an economic contraction, and I think people make just less. So it's harder to break in now than it was before, because I think there are less opportunities. There are just less shows, and the shows that are there, like Lee mentioned, don't have a staff of 12 and a support staff of 6. It's like 4 and 1, and maybe it goes for 2 months. The mini room thing is real. I don't mean to be pessimistic. I guess I mean to be realistic. But that's certainly a consideration.
I listen,
Features.
we're definitely responding to a contraction, and I don't think that we need to kind of dance around that. But I think it's also really important to remember that it's always harder in this industry. Nobody ever, like, even in the middle of peak TV, nobody was like, oh my God, peak TV, it's amazing. It's so easy right now. We just don't think in these terms. Like, it's always harder. There's always challenging. There are always a ton of writers trying to break in. But I think that the ones who work really hard on their craft, the ones who are really passionate about it, the ones who manage to remain good humans, possess some level of sanity, and kind of build that career. I see writers breaking in all the time, so we can talk about how hard it is, and we're not wrong for it, for the record. It is hard, always hard, never easy. But I think that it's the people who fight for it, who stick with it, who really challenge themselves on the craft level and really find a way to maintain their sanity, and their kind of sense of a life bigger than just writing, are the ones that will find success in it. So you have to keep pushing.
So speaking of difficult, whatever, somebody wants to know if there are better or safer genres to stick to that might increase your chances of success of
For
breaking
answer, it's
in.
just what right now, but it's right now. Like, remember,
Yeah.
it's right now. We're speaking to right now. And it's a cyclical industry, things change. So don't chase trends, don't chase the market. I always tell my writers, write the most market forward version of the thing that you natively want to write, of the thing that speaks to you, the thing that you love, the thing that puts your skills on display. Don't write a horror movie just because the horror movies are moving. If you don't know the horror genre, if you've not watched everything, if you're not generating ideas in the space, all it will do is put you in front of horror producers that will want all of that. Horror ideas, understanding of the market, you've seen every movie, you've read every script. If that's not you, that's not you. Don't try to be that, but try to think about the most market forward version of the thing that you are writing. I'm not saying the most commercial, but I'm saying the one that would be the most intriguing to the industry. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to arrive at. It's not a switch to throw. It's something to really think through. Yes, right now, horror, thriller, erotic thriller, broad comedy, some campy comedies, 90 throwbacks. Sure. But at the same time, like, anytime that you try something that is really left off center, something that we've not seen before, something that, a client of mine who won Script Pipeline was #2 on the blacklist in 2022 with a script called Court 17, which, for the record, the script is a small character piece. It's a great, brilliant, beautiful, small character piece. But the writer introduced one mechanism, which is time loop. A tennis player is stuck in a time loop playing the same match against the younger, better, more fit player, and can't get out of said time loop until she finds a way to beat her younger opponent. It is a character piece through and through. The mechanism, the time loop, came in later and made it what it is, and made it a really intriguing script. But the work and the heft of the script still lies in character work. So I'm not saying time loop everything. Don't do it. I'm just saying, think about how do you take the things that you love and make them relevant.
We always talk about at Pipeline. I always talk about those passion scripts. You can see it, like when you're
Yeah.
reading it. Those are the ones that stand out. Um, so Phil, um, okay. So do studios shy away from beginning writers who are in their mid-60s? Someone once said that writers who are older tend to have amazing stories because, let's just say, of a certain age, and when you live a certain amount of years, you do have more life experience. Any advice on how to capture the studio's interest when you're older?
Well, I would say to the question of would studios shy away from a feature written by a 60-year-old person? I would say yes. It's ageism. I mean, it exists. It's a real thing. At the same time, that could also be a selling point. I mean, in the same way that a producer might be interested in reading a story about a fire survivor that was written by a fire survivor, a producer might be interested in reading a story about a 60-year-old person who is involved in a story or has a journey or a particular, subject that is written by that person. So I would almost sort of, if I was a 6-year-old figuring out what I was going to write, I would think I'm not going to write a horror movie. I'm not going to write something that I think is selling. I'm going to write something that is part of my story and my voice. And it might be about a person struggling to break into a business at a particular age or dealing with ageism. I would think that if I was approaching that dilemma, that's the kind of thing I would write. That's not to say that you couldn't write a great romantic comedy, but the age factor is real, I think, in the industry, even though I haven't really dealt with it in a long time. And when I was dealing with it, I was the young one. So it was very easy. So I would say if you're struggling with whether your age is going to affect your chances of success, own it and maybe make a part of your project and part of the pitch.
Yeah, good suggestion. I want to just make a comment. Karen had made a comment to Phil. The creative crop approach is organic, and it depends entirely on the quality of the manure being used.
Well, as writers, we're all pretty good at bullshitting, so there shouldn't be any problem with that.
Exactly. I want to kind of
The one thing to just, if I can add on to this, I've never heard of somebody not buying a script because the writer's too old. Right? At the end of the day, all the business is on the page. And if the writer is deemed too old because there's ageism and that sucks, the moment the material is bought, it is owned by the buyer. It is no longer owned by the writer, and they can do any rewrites that they want to do. I think that our executives potentially less eager to read from somebody who they meet at a party who might be older, potentially. But I think if they have really interesting lived experience, just like Phil said, if they bring something to the table that brings authenticity to the page, I think that can absolutely work to their benefit.
I just want to whip through a couple of these because we're already a little bit over. Somebody asked about the next step for having written a pilot, and I think we kind of did talk a little bit about that whole TV space already, but should they worry about getting their ideas stolen?
Listen, you have to register all your work with the WGA, with the US Copyright Office. Every time you submit an email, make sure that you record who you've submitted to, but track it in an Excel spreadsheet. Know all of your submissions. When your work is registered, there's less incentive to steal it from you than it is to buy it really cheap and keep going. Has IP theft happened? Absolutely. But that's why you have to protect yourself. That's why you have to record every time you submit to a competition, to a reader somewhere. You just want to have a record of that. But yeah, I mean, your job is to get your material exposed. So don't come at it from a place of fear. Don't come at it from a place of distrust, because I don't think it will serve you in your relationships. But do what you have to do to protect yourself. Don't hand your script to somebody in a dark alley. We want records of everything.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I've had clients express concerns about that and concerns about, I have an idea that my friend told me and now I want to write a feature, but he wants some kind of an agreement, or, how are we going to share credit? All these considerations of what could go wrong. And I like to challenge them and say, I hope it all goes wrong. I hope this thing sells and makes $1 million. I hope somebody steals your idea and ends up being a huge success, because then we can deal with that, right? I would hate to see people prevent themselves from even writing or engaging in these projects because of the fears of those considerations, because it's very small that it's going to happen. And if it does, then you'll deal with it when it happens.
Agreed.
Yeah. Somebody is asking, this is more of a novelist question because they're talking about manuscript wish lists, but and comp titles. And when you're pitching for a novel, you have to say it's comparable to this book and basically the search and hunting for those comp titles is sort of cementing their imposter syndrome. You know, you're reading all these, and actually I have to say, whoever asked this question, I'm searching for comp titles, and some of them I'm like, you know, this person's kind of a really good writer. Like, so sometimes it can actually make you feel good. But she has a unique voice, or she or he, they, and people have tried to tell them for years, but they just can't seem to believe it. Is there still a market for originality? So
Absolutely.
they're
There's
feeling a little hollow.
Listen, it's all about original voices. It's all about what you bring to the table. Comps are important in the feature space and the TV space because we want to know what we're building on, right? We're in a world where everything is downloadable and accessible and right at your fingertips and on Netflix, or you can, you know, spend $20 on Apple if you really need to, and download whatever it is you want to watch. The question is, how are we building on it, right? You're building onto an existing tapestry of storytelling. You're adding on to that. So understanding where that material lives and what the audience is and how you are extending what was done before, taking a left on something that had gone right previously, or whatever it is, that's just important in terms of understanding its place in the industry. I think that it's much more dangerous and much more, not dangerous, but risky when somebody comes up and says, I have this and the industry has never done that, or we've not done it for 50 years. Well, usually if we've not done it for 50 years, that is for a reason. Nobody forgot to make that type of movie or that type of TV show. So we want to understand where the movie or the TV show lives, where the audience is, what it builds on. And I don't think it speaks to imposterism. I think it actually speaks to understanding of the industry and how it all works.
Any other thoughts to add to that, Phil?
Well, there's certain things that people will see that make them want to read your script. I mean, it's the title, it's the log line, and it's X meets Y. And all three of those are opportunities to really, in a very short, you know, use of words, capture somebody's attention. So if you're having a hard time figuring out what your X meets Y is that describes your project, well, yeah, because if it's never been done before, that's not exactly the sort of thing a producer would really be responding to, or an agent like, oh, I can sell this, it's never been done. You know, we want to see it's X box office smash meets Y artistic success. Wow. You know, I'll read that.
Okay, so question, one thing we haven't talked about, and this was the last audience question, that we haven't talked about voice yet, and people want it, and it's objective, and how do writers figure it out, either in screenplays, TV, pilot, short stories, or novel? Like, what are your thoughts, like, you know, when you're working with writers, when you were writing yourself, trying to hone your voice,
Right.
like, do you have any, I mean, I maintain voice is everything. I'm right now, I'm reading for a book pipeline contest, and like you said, title can make a submission pop out, but that voice, it's you can't teach that. So
no,
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a little story about writing a movie called Dude, Where's My Car? Which I wrote. It started off a series of sketches about a couple of guys who were stoned and funny. And I wrote it because I thought it was funny and I enjoyed it. And eventually I was like, maybe there's a movie here. And then I thought of a funny title. And then I went ahead and wrote it. And I showed it to my buddy, who we have a close friend, and he gave me some thoughts, and I wrote another draft. And I sent it to my feature agent. Now, I was very lucky in that I had an agency at the time because I was already working on that 70s show. But the reception they got was like, what is this? It's amazing. We're going to sell this. And, you know, that was a sort of a 1% kind of experience. But it's the kind of thing that can happen if you write something that speaks to your voice and something that you want to see. If I had tried to pitch that movie, I would never have written it. If I'd even told a couple of people at the show where I worked that I was thinking of writing a movie about this, they would have been like, that's crazy. But I wrote it because it was something I was passionate about, that I enjoyed, and that I had fun writing. And what ended up happening, it was a very distinct voice. And not only did it sell and get made, but I got a lot of meetings because people wanted to meet the guy who wrote Dude, Where's My Car? It was a very popular read because the voice was so different. And it was unlike anything that anybody had written out there at that time in the industry. So I think it's important to find the project that you're passionate about and write something that you want to read, regardless of what you think the industry wants. Because ironically, if you do that, sometimes that then becomes what the industry wants to read.
You are the first member of your audience, so agreed.
And somebody asked, they said that movie's nuts. Where did the aliens idea in that film come from?
The bubble wrap thing, I think, maybe kind of, they weren't alien. The alien, like, I can't, like, at the time, I was writing about what I loved, which was marijuana and Cheech and Chong. I mean, you know, I'm sort of amazed right now looking back. I'm the same person who wrote that movie. But I think, again, that speaks to just writing what makes you laugh or what you're passionate about. And then somehow, even though that's not like the industry might expect, people can identify the passion and the distinctiveness of that voice and say, hey, I want a little bit of that with my project.
So I want to just finish with one last question to both of you, like your final little piece of advice that maybe that you wish you knew about this industry before you jumped into it. Either one of you can go first. Okay.
I'll go first. I would say that nobody is going to be more critical of work than yourself. And I would be very careful about projecting the criticism that you're feeling internally onto other people who are going to read your script. And that's both in the urge to write and not limiting yourself, but it's also projecting that, the danger of projecting that onto people who you give your script to. Would you read my script? It's just a first draft. I know it's not very good. You know, you're automatically undercutting yourself. And it's because you're worried that people aren't going to like it. So I would be passionate about your own projects. And of course, other people's opinion matters, but I wouldn't define yourself by what other people think of your writing. And I certainly would try not to anticipate rejection or failure in a way that affects how you present yourself.
And that's good life advice as well.
Absolutely. All of those. I would add on to it with find the people that you really trust, that you trust to tell you when it's good, that you trust to tell you when it needs work, who know how to support you in a manner that's not destructive, that allow you and challenge you to get better, but also know when to hold back when you're having a difficult time with something. Find those people that you really trust and do for them what they're doing for you. Give them what you can, and know that they will be there for you when you need them. That trusted circle is really important. That community is really important. Give yourself grace and really nurture your passion, because that's a superpower. And that is something that you want to bring to everything that you do. So nurture it, guard it, protect it, love it, and be kind to yourself in order to do so.
I think a lot of writers have a hard time cutting themselves some slack.
Yeah,
they do.
So excellent, excellent advice. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with everybody. And just so everyone who is here knows, I'm going to do the recording. I'm a little bit of a freak, so I'll probably do it tonight, and I will have it in the email to you in the morning, and with some links that we talked about. But thank you again. Really appreciate you guys being here and taking the time out of your lives. I was going to say crazy lives, but that's not the right thing to say.
Little projection there, Judy. Yeah, thank you.
Little projection. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thanks for being here.